Let me talk a little bit about the deficit, a little bit about taxes, and then a little bit about spending. The deficit is kind of the place to start because, not because we think that deficits necessarily affect economic growth of the economy that much, but the gigantic deficit we now have will unfortunately be a great temptation for folks in Washington to raise taxes in coming years. Last year's federal deficit was about $550 billion, an enormous amount of money, $500 billion. A few months ago, before the Wall Street crisis broke, I sort of sat down on my spreadsheet and said, well, where's that deficit going to go in future years? And if you sort of spin out the numbers, it looked like we were going to hit a $1 trillion deficit by about 2017 or so, creating this big temptation to raise taxes. Unfortunately, we're now in fiscal year 2009, and the federal deficit is going to be over $1 trillion this year, an absolutely staggering amount of money. When you consider that the federal government spends just about $3 trillion now, it taxes $2 trillion, then has to borrow $1 trillion, or a third of everything it spends. It will be borrowing this year. It's really staggering. The other thing that's really astounded me over the last 6 months in Washington is the revival of Keynesian economic thinking. I got my BA and MA in economics back in the 80s and early 90s, and I remember learning that Keynesianism was dead, that monetarism, supply-side economics, that was ascendant, and that was everyone seemed to agree that that was the way to go. In recent months, it's really been amazing how the Bush administration supports Keynesian economics, this idea that the government can spend money to stimulate the economy in the short run, that we need to boost consumer spending and aggregate demand. This is all 1930s style Keynesianism, and it's completely the opposite of what I thought the Republican Party had learned decisively in the 1980s. So we've seen the Bush administration, we've seen the chairman of the Federal Reserve is a Keynesian, Brookings Institution of Economists, of course, are Keynesians, but even folks like Harvard's Martin Feldstein, a staunch conservative and one of the leading fiscal experts in the country, it's remarkable. He supported stimulus package after stimulus package, more and more spending. This is really remarkable, and so it's really struck me that there's a lot of basic education we need for policymakers and the general public in the years ahead to help them realize that what is important with the economy and the budget is long-run growth, creating the proper incentives for growth and capital investment and that sort of stuff. Of course, a lot of where we are today in Washington is the fiscal wreckage left by the Bush administration. Spending under 8 years of the Bush administration, total federal spending is up 68% in 8 years. By contrast, spending under 8 years of President Clinton, up 32%. So the Bush administration has spending increases more than double under President Clinton. It's a really terrible legacy to leave for the next generation and for the incoming administration. Taxes, I think, is a key area, of course, where we're all scared of what an Obama administration might do. I've recently written some pieces on some of the details of Obama's plan, and Obama ran as a tax cutter. He did a better job than Senator McCain in running as a tax cutter. He appeared to be sort of a fiscal conservative. He promised middle-class tax cuts. If you look at the details of his plans, he offers lots of tax increases, and he offers lots of what he calls tax cuts. But when you look at the details, these tax cuts he's promising are actually spending increases. Nearly all of Obama's tax cuts are so-called refundable tax cuts, refundable tax credits. And he has half a dozen of these big refundable tax credits that essentially would have the Treasury mail checks of thousands of dollars to the 40 or 50% of Americans who now don't pay income tax. So to go through Obama's proposed tax increases, then his tax cuts that are actually spending increases. Tax increases. He will raise the top 2 federal tax brackets. The top rate will go back up to 40%. Cool. But the top rate will be even higher than 40% because he promises to restore income phase-outs for personal exemptions and itemized deductions, which will add a few more points on top of the top tax rate. Notice now that the average top income tax rate for the 30 countries the 30 countries in the industrial world is now 42%. So the United States will now have a higher income tax rate if Obama goes ahead than the average for our major trading partners. He will increase, as you know, the income and the capital gains and dividends tax rates. He's going to increase tax rates on oil and gas companies, increase taxes on multinational corporations. And so here's Obama's proposed tax cuts. He's got half a dozen of these refundable tax credits. Refundable tax credit, $500 for low-income workers. Refundable tax credit, $800 for mortgages. $500 refundable tax credit for a saver's credit. $4,000 refundable credit for education expenses. Expand the EITC. Expand the child care tax credit and make it refundable. All in all, he's promising all these tax credits add up to, and this is a Brookings Institution number, $650 billion of increased spending over the next 10 years will come from these refundable tax credits. He has, from what I can see, only a single tax cut in his entire plan, and that he promises to take seniors who earn under $50,000 off the tax rolls. That will be a true tax cut for some people, but I oppose that type of policy that sort of divides and conquers and treats Americans differently. I think that's horrible tax policy, but that's the only tax cut in his entire plan. So, you know, Obama was a genius in selling this as middle-class tax cuts. He also, as I've written about, he also sort of posed as an earmark cutter and a pork barrel spending cutter, probably as good as Senator McCain did. And he produced an 11-page document that promises cutting waste and fraud and cutting the number of earmarks. So he sort of outflanked McCain on both the tax and spending side to an extent. So what's going to happen to all these tax promises? Well, you know, Congress is going to approve some of them, and Obama said that some of these tax proposals are going to be the top of his agenda when he assumes office in January. But it is also true, of course, that the House and Senate tax committees have enormous power over tax policy. And so, you know, a lot of some of these Obama ideas won't become law, thankfully. Unfortunately, probably the worst stuff, the tax hikes, will become law. And a really frightening thing to me is the Democrats and their rhetoric, their anti-corporate and anti-business rhetoric, is really scary. As John mentioned, my book, Global Tax Revolution, looks at the dramatic cuts in business taxes, corporate taxes around the world over the last couple decades. The average corporate tax rate in Europe now is only 23%. The U.S. rate, federal and state, is about 40%. So, you know, formerly socialist countries like Sweden and other countries, they have substantially lower business taxes than we do now. And so looking ahead, you know, we've got the economy's got to recover in the short run from this recession, but in the long run, you know, where's our automobile industry, where's our financial services industry going to be if we have this really high and punishing corporate tax in the United States? Financial services, cars, those products and services can be produced anywhere in the world. Financial services, you can do all the trading in London and Singapore and Hong Kong. We don't, you know, the financial services industry, a lot of it doesn't have to be in New York anymore. And it seems to me, with our very high tax rates, a lot of these American industries won't recover in the long run, which is really pretty tragic.